Do separates sound different than integrateds? Well, we get asked that question. And this particular one comes from Sean in Vancouver, Canada. Some people feel that a separate preamp and power amp will sound better than an integrated amplifier, though it depends on the system, of course. Is this the case? And if so, why? There are a number of reasons why separates sound better than integrateds. And as a direct answer to your question, yeah, generally separates sound better than integrated. It's why separates exist. Years ago, when hi-fi started, we had the big console stereos. That's the ultimate integrated, because there you have the speakers, you have the turntable, you have the amplifier, the tuner, the radio tuner. Remember what those were? Everything was in one cabinet, and you turned that sucker on and it just played. And some were great and some were crap, and you know, but those consoles were all in one. The biggest integrateds we ever made. And then slowly over time, people started thinking about separating those. And maybe the speakers were great, but they didn't like the turntable, so they would swap the turntable out. Or maybe they didn't like the amplifier. And over time, they separated the components that were integrated into these cabinets into separate things. Like here's, you know, behind me is a group of separates from our kind of museum that we've had. And certainly this is very much in the future from when those existed. But as time went on, like in the 60s, for instance, my father, Don, who was a kind of a stereo nut, which I'm sure where I got a lot of what I had. He had a amplifier, a preamplifier, and tuner together, and a separate turntable, and then speakers that he had put around the room. So that was sort of a version of separates. The reason that separates exist is for a couple of reasons. One, it's easy to mix and match. So if you weren't so interested in radio quality, for instance, you could buy a cheap radio tuner and then an expensive amplifier and preamplifier. Or in the case where, you know, everything you listened to was FM and it was really the quality of that radio that you wanted, well, then you could put all your money into something like a Magnum Dynalab or some, you know, or a Marantz. What was the famous Marantz tuner that was, I can't remember the number of it now, but there were some great tuners at one time made that are still coveted today. So you put your money into that and then everything else kind of follows. So that's one reason why it allows you to do that. Mix and match, put your money where you think the quality matters most. But at the core of it, when a manufacturer tries to combine two things, let's just take a simple integrated, which is a power amp and a preamplifier together. One of the first things that you have to realize is that you're now sharing a common power supply. One power supply for the amp and the preamp together. And when you do that, you're going to lose fidelity. It just happens. Even if you were to put two completely separate power supplies inside of one box, you still have one plug, you still have the interference within the box from EMI and noise. It's just a compromise. Now, the one thing I will say, separates are compromised slightly because now we have to include interconnecting cables. And interconnecting cables, that's a whole nother can of worms in themselves. So as long as you're willing to spend some money on decent interconnecting cables, separates are by far the way to go. There are good integrateds. We'll be making one later. But are they as good as separates? No. Okay, thanks. Good question. Bye.